This is Lauren Kimball for ANI 150, and today we're going to touch on a few of the concepts that I get the most questions on in class. Those include applying a material to a mesh in our scene, how to export the UV Snapshot, how to save the maps out of Photoshop, and apply them to the mesh back into Maya. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, you want to go to File and Set Your Project. That way Maya knows where to find all of the texture maps that you should have been organizing into folders. Alright, after I do that, I can press Open and find all of my previous scenes in the Scenes folder. I can go ahead and open up a scene that has my low poly dye without any texture information on it. Now, by default, Maya applies a Lambert shader, which we can see in the attribute editor just by clicking on the polygon mesh and scrolling off to the right. The material node tends to be the last tab within the attribute editor. Now, if you have to click through a whole bunch of these tabs in order to get to that Lambert, it means you haven't been deleting your history. Remember to delete history. It's under polymodeling. It's this little button here with a little blue clock. You can also access it by going to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Alright? So we don't want to ever use the default Lambert because whatever we do to this, it's going to apply to anything we create here on out. So that's a no. Plus, the Lambert is very limited. It's a very basic material, so you won't have the opportunity to apply, say, specular maps, for example. So we want to apply a new material that has more options. So we're going to go ahead and click on the mesh. And the quickest way to apply a material is to simply right-click, scroll down to Assign Favorite Material, and then apply one of the favorite materials in Maya. And there's your blend at the very top. The other alternative is to open up your Hypershade. The Hypershade can be found under Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, but you can also find it at the top of your screen here, right above your tabs off to the right. You have that little blue sphere with the white sphere intersecting it. Just click on that, and that will open up your Hypershade menu. Now, the Hypershade is really useful because it gives you a visual representation of all the materials that exist inside of Maya. In this case, we only have the Lambert and a particle cloud and a shader, which these are always going to be available as the defaults. But we want to create something new. Specifically, we want to create a material that will allow us to apply all of our maps. Now, before, if you remember, when we clicked on this polygon mesh, it said to apply a favorite material. And you'll notice over here under the Create Nodes that there is a Favorites Maya. You click on that, and those are the same materials that you could shortcut to in the main menu over here, or in the perspective mode over here. Alright, so oops. Now, what I just did was I accidentally grabbed the Hypershade tab and I held it for too long over the interface, and Maya assumed that I wanted to drag and drop it into the interface. If this happens to you, you can just grab that Hypershade tab. Hypershade. Sorry, I thought I said Hypershave. Hypershade tab. You can grab that Hypershade tab and pull it away from the dock, and it'll become a single menu once again. Alright, so up here are all the materials that exist in the scene. Under Create are all the materials that you could create. You also have other nodes like utility nodes and cameras, but right now we're just going to focus on the basic materials that come with Maya. And this is what you're going to be using like 99% of the time that you're texturing. So over here, this big empty gray space here is a stage where you can see the inputs and the outputs on your material. Because remember, it's all very modular. We talked about in class how you could plug different things in. And this screen over here would give you a representation of that. Off to the right, we have kind of a cool little material viewer that gives you an idea of what that material looks like on this interesting shape. And below that are the same attributes that you find in the attribute editor when you select the mesh. Alright, so I'm going to go over here to Create and click on Blend. And as you can see here, you've got that representation on the stage, and up here you've got the material added to the Materials tab, and over here you can see all of its properties because that is the shader we have selected. So I'm going to go over to these properties, and I'm going to go ahead and type in dice_txt. And you'll notice that in addition to naming it over here, it changes the name everywhere that material has been, is visible. Okay, so once we have the blend created and we've named it, I'm going to go over here and click on this die, and then I'm going to go back to my Hypershade menu and right-click on the material that I wish to apply, and then I'm going to go ahead and assign material to selection. All right. Now I'm going to take this die and I'm going to click on the new dice texture, which will be again to the farthest right inside the attribute editor. And I'm going to start plugging in my maps, or I would start plugging in my maps. But first I want to visit another concept that I had a lot of questions on, and that was how to export a UV snapshot. We did that at the very beginning of this process with the can, and some of you haven't revisited since the can, so we're just going to touch on it real quick. So to export the UV snapshot, all you have to do is go up here to UV and go to the UV editor. Everything that we did when we laid out these UVs has stayed. You don't have to relay out the UVs every time you open up the scene. Once you've made them, they're there. So to re-access those UVs, you just have to go back to the UV editor and select the mesh whose UVs you want to see. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select the mesh and then click on this little button here that looks like a camera. All right, and that is going to open up our UV Snapshot Options. Now because I set my project, my out UV is going to go to my image folder just like I want it to. Typically I would prefer that you choose a Targa as your image format because it has very low compression and you can get a good quality resolution from that. But for whatever reason, my computer wants to crash Maya every time I try to export that Targa. So I'm going to go ahead and change this my image format to TIFF, which is also low compression, really good file format. All right, I'm going to choose 4096 by 4096 as my size because as we discussed in class, we want to go big and then shrink. We don't want to necessarily start and build our texture at the resolution we're asked, because just in case something happens and we're asked to make a bigger texture, that way we have it on standby and we don't have to go in and rebuild it at a higher resolution. Remember, you can always shrink. You can't always grow a texture. You grow a texture, it's a raster image, so it's going to pixelate. So always go big, one size bigger, and then you can bring it down. And that's just a good healthy workflow to start developing as a habit. Okay, so I know where it's going, I know what file format I want, I know the size, everything else is peachy, apply and close. I had made one earlier, so it's asking me to overwrite, and I'm like, yeah, we can overwrite. So I'm going to close out of the UV editor, and I'm going to show you where it went to. Now, I put my exercise on the desktop. I can double click on this and I can go into images, and there is my UV snapshot. I can go open, preview, and there it is. Remember, anything you push out of Maya is going to show up in the images folder. Anything you wish to bring into Maya as far as textures are concerned are going to be in your source images folder. Now, if you do not set your project, Maya is going to send it to the default project folder. It exists on every computer where you install Maya, and it's usually under My Documents, Maya, Projects, Default. If it sounds like a nightmare to hunt down, it can be, depending on what operating system you're working with, and of course if you're working on your home computer. But if you don't want to have to go through all the trouble of opening all those directories to get to your file, I suggest you set your project. So now I'm going to go open up Photoshop real quick so that you can see my scene. This one is the 2048, so I don't want to actually have that one open right now. I'm going to go open up my 4096. Alright, so they were actually identical, the 2048 and the 4096 as far as content. The difference is the resolution. So when I build my file, I want to build it this way. I want to build it inside of Photoshop as a high resolution. So when I bring in my UV map, go ahead and bring that in real quick. Should be under Images. Alright, when I bring that in, the first thing I like to do is invert it, and that is Control-I, or if you are working on a Mac, it is Command-I. And there's my UV map. I like to duplicate it, and a great way to duplicate that UV map is to grab the layer and hold it over the New button. And then if you look over here at the Dice Master file, everything else is sandwiched in between. So I can turn on this UV map layer, and if I look in close, you can see that it overlays over my texture to act as sort of a guide so that I don't paint in an area that's not going to show up on my dice. Alright, to do that though, because you'll notice that over here, if I create a layer and I sandwich it in, and I start drawing, nothing shows up. But if I click on that top layer, I can apply a multiply blend mode, and it allows me to see through. So this top layer, this little guide, it's got a multiply attached. I can turn it on and off. That's all it's needed for. I go ahead and import my normal map, and I'm going to turn off the diffuse layer. I can import my normal map and my AO map and have them at the ready, and then work on building up my diffuse map. Okay? Now, when everything is happy and ready to go, I like to go ahead and create a new folder. Okay. Name this new folder Specular Map, or Specular ADJ for adjustment layers. So once you're done creating your diffuse map, you have all the information you need to create a specular map. And to create a specular map, it involves you taking all the color out of the scene and then adjusting the contrast so that you've got some kind of more interesting levels to work with, and so that you don't have any hot spots. Remember, specular maps are telling Maya what's shiny and what isn't, and anything that is like a solid black is going to come off as a matte finish, whereas anything that's got like a white highlight to it or a light gray is going to be shinier and it's going to actually pick up light. So to do this, I'm going to go down here, and just like I would create a new layer, I'm instead going to go over two buttons to this little half circle, click it, and those are my list of adjustment layers. Now, in class, we adjusted layers using image up here, image, adjustment, if I had a layer selected, and could adjust the levels, could adjust the hue and saturation. But the problem with that is, one, it only applies to one layer at a time doing that method, and two, it's permanent. This way, when you create adjustment layers, not only does it apply to everything beneath it, but it's also toggleable. Toggle. You can toggle it. Toggle. Blah, blah, blah. I'm making up words. It's late. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and create a hue and saturation. You know, if you select the specular folder that we've created, it'll automatically plug those into that folder so that everything stays organized. I am a stickler for organization. The bigger your projects get, the more you're going to want them to be organized. So I'm going to go ahead and add a hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer. Now when I click on either of these adjustment layers, all the information and options and inputs show up under properties. I'm going to go with hue saturation first, take the saturation levels and take them all the way to -100. And as a result, everything is black and white, which is just the way specular maps are read. I'm going to go ahead and double click on levels, reopen that properties. Oops, I accidentally clicked on the layer mask. All these adjustment layers are attached to layer masks, so make sure that you are clicking on the little symbol that represents what that adjustment is when you want to go in and adjust that specifically. All right, so I'm going to click on levels, and I'm going to pull away from some of the from the white, because I want this to be grungy and I don't want anything to be too bright. And then I'm going to go up here and pull in some of the dark, grab the middle control so that I can kind of play around, and I want to increase the contrast, but I don't want to completely lose my variations. There we go. I like that. I like that. So I can see a lot of detail. The darks are really dark, and there's still a couple of lighter spots. That contrast is going to make for a more interesting specular map. All right. Now, that's how this particular specular map is made, and this would be a great starting point. Understand that when you are creating something a little bit more complicated, like say a human face, you're going to want to pay close attention to where the light hits on the human face. Like say the zygomatic arch, your cheekbone is going to catch a lot more light. Your forehead is going to catch a lot more light. So the anatomy is going to play a lot more into your specular map than in this case. But for now, for such a simple object, this is sufficient. Okay, so I've got my maps, and what I'm going to do is save this out as File, Save As, Dice Master 4096, which I already did. So just replace it. When I'm done, I'm going to go up to Image Size, and I'm going to change it from 4096 to it was 2048. I always mess this one up for some reason. I've just been doing that lately. I'm going to change that down to 2048 and press OK. All right, and now I have my lower resolution, so it's not taking so much processing power to load onto Maya when we put it in the mesh. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm gonna go ahead and save this as Dice Master 2048. And I'm going to press save. It's going to ask if I want to replace it because I already made it. Sure. Alright, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to save each individual map out. So I'll display the normal map. Oops. And I'll file save it as the normal map, as a target. I'll do the same thing with my AO map if I feel so inclined. Although typically in this case the AO map's woven into the texture, so I don't necessarily have to. Export the diffuse map, export the specular map, and you should be saving all of them inside of your source images folder. So there they all are. And if I need to go back and change anything, I can always go back to the 4096 or the 2048. So yeah, I'm going to go open up Maya and complete the final step of this, and that's just plugging in the maps. So I'm going to click on this little checker box that represents the render nodes, and I'm going to look for the file node. Now, typically everything's displayed in a large list, but I can go up here to this box and type in file, and that will pull the file node right up immediately. When I click on that, the file node's attributes appear in the attribute box, and I'm going to go under image name, click on the Manila folder, and I'm going to look for my diffuse targa and open. I didn't save any of these maps out in Photoshop like in front of you, so just a really quick side note, make sure that when you save out a targa, that you are only going with 24-bit channel. You're not doing the 32. Those extra 8 channels, they're just for transparency. If you save out those channels, you're going to get some really weird results. So be careful and always go with the middle option when you're saving out your targas. Alright, so, ooh, there's some seams I really want to fix, but that's for later. I got the diffuse map on there. Click on the die. I'm going to go into bump mapping next, because you'll notice there's nothing in there that says normal map. The normal map my speech tonight. The normal map is going to piggyback onto the bump mapping node. So if I click on this little checker box, click on file, I have 2 nodes that pop up. One of them is the bump map node, the other is the file node that we're familiar with. And the bump map node, I want you to go in and say use as bump map. Instead of use as bump map, change it to tangent space normals. And then you're going to go under file and load up that normal map. Oh. And now you'll see that the die's little divots are actually responding to the light as though it's actually part of the mesh when it's not. That's pretty cool. I really like normal maps. Alright, so the next one that I'm going to go with is Specular Color, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the little render node, go to File, and I don't have any bump map node to contend with. I can just click on the little Manila folder. and I'm going to click on Specular. And you don't notice a huge difference because, we're just working with default lighting here in Maya, but that is how you would apply the textures in this scene. And later we're going to go through how to apply these textures in Marmoset, where you're really going to be able to see the cool display of your maps applied to your mesh. Alright, thank you so much for your time, and let me know if you have any questions.